The United States court system is one that has been built on several foundations, with due process, presumption of innocence, and equal justice under the law, helping to lay out fair trials on the basis of facts judged by one's own peers. Though in 1897, something odd occurred. A woman who was suspected of having passed away due to a heart attack was later found to have been murdered, though it would only come to light because her mother claimed that the ghost of her daughter told her to look further. For this special Halloween episode of Learn Something New, we're going to find out how the Greenbrier ghost allegedly helped solve her own murder, in the only case of spectral evidence having been admitted into the United States court system. So light the jack-o'-lanterns and grab a bowl of candy as we learn something new. At 10 a.m. on January 23, 1897, 23-year-old Zona Shu's body was found by an errand boy. She had been lying on the floor in her house, face down at the foot of the stairs, stretched with one arm tucked underneath her chest and the other extended, her head cocked to one side. Edward Shu, who often went by the nickname Trout, was at the home before the coroner could make it. Trout had already moved his wife's body to their bed where he'd dressed her in a high-necked gown. As the coroner began examining Zona, Trout became overwhelmed with emotion and cradled Zona's head and her shoulders, sobbing and weeping. The coroner stopped his exam out of respect for the grieving spouse and signed off on the cause of death being everlasting faint, the name given at the time for a heart attack. A traditional wake was held before Zona's next day burial, and attendants noticed peculiar behavior from Trout. When the casket was open for viewing, he immediately placed a scarf over Zona's neck as well as propping her head with a pillow and blanket. Trout then put on another spectacular show of grief and made it impossible for mourners to get a closer look at her face. Zona Shu would then go on to be buried in the Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery in Greenbrier County. Initially, everyone who knew the Shus accepted Zona's death as not suspicious, except for her mother, Mary Jane Hester. According to accounts from those close to Hester, she claimed that she prayed every night for 4 weeks on end that the Lord would reveal the truth about her daughter's death. Then, in the darkness of night, when Mary Jane Hester was wide awake, Zona's spirit allegedly appeared. She would go on to report that it was not in a dream, it was in person. For 4 consecutive nights, Hester claimed her daughter's ghost came to the foot of her bed and reported the facts of the crime that had ended her life. Zona's ghost was said to have revealed a history of physical abuse from her husband. Her death reportedly resulted from a violent fight over a meal the night before she was found. She even gave Hester specific details about her injuries so that they might prove her legitimacy. Mary Jane Hester steadfastly maintained that her daughter's ghost was real, and Zona's reports of the cause of death were accurate. Hester was so compelling in her paranormal description that she convinced local prosecutor John Preston to reopen the case. Preston's investigation found Trout Shu had a history of violence. In another state, he had served prison time for assaults and thefts. He had been married twice before, with one other wife dying under mysterious circumstances. Not only that, but the Greenbrier community was also reporting more peculiar behavior from Trout. Combined with the coroner's admission that he failed to conduct a thorough exam of the body, Preston established sufficient grounds to exhume Zona's body and conduct a proster postmortem examination. Zona was autopsied by 3 medical doctors on February 22, 1897. With the official cause of death being anoxia from manual strangulation, compounded by a broken neck. Bruising, consistent with finger marks, were noted on Zona's neck. Her esophagus was also damaged, and her first and second vertebrae were fractured. These were the same injuries that the mother of the victim claimed she had saw on her daughter's ghost. An inquest was held, and Trout Shu was summoned to testify. Although he denied being present at the time of Zona's death, he was unable to establish an alibi, and was considered an unreliable, self-serving witness. It was ruled a homicide, and Trout Shu was charged with her murder. His trial began in Greenbrier Circuit Court on June 22, 1897. During the trial, Mary Jane Hester herself was called to the stand to testify, and she stood by her ghost sighting story. It's unknown exactly how influential the story of the victim's ghost was for the 12 jurors, but it was remarkable that the case of a woman who had been ruled to have had a heart attack would lead to a murder trial that resulted in the jury only taking 1 hour and 10 minutes of deliberation before returning a verdict of guilty for murder in the first degree. Trout Shu was sentenced to life in prison. This was the first and only known case in the United States where testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. But spectral evidence, as it's called, has had much use prior to the formation of the United States. You may have heard of its role in the Salem witch trials. Going all the way back to the 1600s, the superstitious communities would begin to reach a breaking point. As William Phips, the newly appointed royal governor from England, made his way to the Massachusetts Bay province, people had already begun accusing others of being witches. After he arrived, he reacted to the situation quickly, creating a special court to try all of the people accused of being witches within Salem. It was called the Court of Oyer and Terminer, meaning to hear and determine. The more than 200 people accused of practicing witchcraft between 1692 and 1693 were not given a fair trial. They weren't assumed innocent until proven guilty, and many were accused on basis of spectral evidence. More than 20 of those accused were executed, with faulty tests to prove their innocence and shaky grounds for trying them in the first place. Despite some even at the time trying to talk some sense into the court, like Minister Cotton Mather, who wrote to the court asking them not to allow spectral evidence, the use would persist for some time, leading to his son, then president of Harvard, to further denounce it, saying of spectral evidence, it would be better that 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person be condemned. It's believed that the governor's response to the trials were in part due to these pleas, though more than likely the fact that his own wife was accused of witchcraft had something to do with it as well. Regardless, Governor Phips prohibited further arrest of witches, and the court was dissolved. Following the trials and executions, many involved, like Judge Samuel Sewall, publicly confessed error and guilt. On January 14, 1697, the General Court ordered a day of fasting and soul-searching for the tragedy of Salem. In 1702, the court declared the trials unlawful, and in 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of those accused, and granted £600 restitution to the heirs. However, it was not until 1957, more than 250 years later, that Massachusetts formally apologized for the events of 1692. In the end, the trials didn't conclude because people stopped believing in the witches, but rather because people lost faith in the trial's ability to do an effective job at finding out who the witches were. The misdeeds that occurred throughout the witch trials would indeed serve the future United States as a good lesson in what not to do in the courtroom, which makes it all the more bizarre of how the case of the murder of Zona Shu managed to slip through the cracks, how the alleged testimony of a ghost helped convict her own murderer. Thanks for watching. I wanted to go with a bit of a spookier episode topic for the Halloween episode, so let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. As always, thank you for your continued support of the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Happy Halloween!